Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Little Mix called Glory Days. I was really worried about this album, and man, I did not want to be, because if you've been following the continuing saga of the psycho music girl groups Fifth Harmony and Little Mix, of which before this I've covered 2 albums apiece from both bands, I've been coming to the stark realization that the groups really are being mismanaged across the board, both of them from production to writing all the way up to the marketing. For some ungodly reason, Fifth Harmony was being pushed towards R&B on their debut, and then they added more tropical touches for their second album, and it became all the more apparent they should be making pop music, certainly not pop R&B. They didn't really harmonize, they barely wrote their own music, and they weren't exactly even as singers, and with their most pitchy and frustrating singer, Camila Cabello, was pushing her own pop career in a Nicole Scherzinger sort of way, and their best songs off of 727 were when they were making actual pop music, like the tropical collaboration with Fetty Wap, All My Head Flex, which was a pretty decent track. Little Mix, on the other hand, well, okay, Salute was the first clue that they could easily step into more of that R&B mold, and they would do just fine. They actually harmonized, they had great voices, they had great chemistry. They started taking a much more active role in writing a lot of their songs. And yet, Psycho, backed by Simon Cowell, instead insisted upon pushing them as the plastic pop group with all the bottom shelf production that their label deigned to give them. Sure, this has led to international success and a string of #1 hits in the UK, but it's almost meant that any effort to break them in the United States has been kind of token. Whereas if they'd been packaged for the next Destiny's Child, they'd probably be competitive in the US, especially over the past few years where R&B is a lot bigger. They could compete with a lot of modern R&B right now. And yes, Get Weird was a good pop album, but Salute was the evidence for me that they could do more. They could try that R&B sound, provided of course they had a budget or producers and guest stars that didn't suck. And that's why I had a lot of reservations about Glory Days, because it looked like it was even going more pop, and I had zero faith that Psycho would actually give them the production to make great pop music in the mold of, say, Girls Aloud or even the Spice Girls. To put it another way, there were co-writing credits from Meghan Trainor, and their only guest star on this album, Charlie Puth. All this gave me a real sinking feeling going in, but hey, Shout Out to My Ex, that's a good song, it was decent, so this could turn out well, right? Well, okay. Remember how Little Mix's last album was called Get Weird? They should have saved that title for this record, because Glory Days is the sort of wild, careening pop album that leaps across styles and sounds with the sort of insanity that I normally expect from a modern-day Jason Derulo project. I'll say this for Little Mix, they sure as hell didn't make a boring mainstream pop record saturated in reverb and drab tones, instead opting for one of the most colorful, deliriously ridiculous pop albums I've heard in 2016. And make no mistake, when you take this sort of approach, the only thing keeping you from outright disaster are strong writing and good performances, and while I definitely have some questions for the former, the latter does save this record from blowing apart. It's definitely a messy album, to the point where I'm a little bit astounded that Simon Cowell let this get out the door, and yet there are enough moments that are either excellent or kind of blowing my mind that there's a very real part of me that wants to endorse this. It's not a great record, but yeah, there's something to this that I really do like. So for all of you who think that I've completely lost my mind here, let me stress the central reason why this record works at all: the girls themselves. I've always thought that the group was well balanced with distinctive voices that carry a ton of texture, but Glory Days seems to have finally eased back enough on the vocal filters and auto-tune to let it all come blasting through with a lot of volume. Now, that's not saying that there aren't effects. You can tell there's a tad more compression than I'd otherwise prefer around some of the vocals, particularly from Jessie, but that's a minor concern, especially when the flip side is getting to hear them belt and harmonize as much as ever. They sound a lot more raw and organic. Go back to the shifts in the vocal arrangement on Touch, or how raw Perry sounds in the opening of Power. Again, she could make pop rock and kick ass at it. Or how sultry Jade and Leanne sound on Your Love. Or how vulnerable and raw Jessie comes off on Nobody Like You. Now that Leanne has picked up some of the more raw, soulful bite in her voice, I'd probably say that Jessie's thinner coo is my least favorite of the group, but she does have dramatic range, and that song proves it. And that's before you get the louder and fuller harmonies on the hooks of Shout Out to My Ex or Private Show and Nothing Else Matters. Not the first time this record reminds me of S Club 7 in a very good way. And for this sort of brand of pop, you're not going to get more anthemic swell that feels more organic and earned. Hell, they even managed to get a half-decent performance out of Charlie Puth, mostly by playing him as a secondary passive actor in the story, and a very well-timed key change. I'll give them points for that. And that ties into the second big reason why this album actually holds together for me: the composition and the production. Now, I will not say that the Little Mix have top-of-the-line or even genre-pushing production here. This isn't Xenomania after all. But I will say that it holds together probably the best out of any Little Mix records in terms of the fullness and melodic balance, which makes a lot of the wild stylistic shifts a fair bit easier to handle. It also helps that at the core of these songs are rock-solid melodies and hooks that finally have the impact and swell to match the vocal arrangements. From the galloping acoustic groove of Shout Out to My Ex to the arranged instrumentation and strings that fill out the back of F.U. and Nothing Like You. A big part of that was the addition of a lot more horns, from the touches around the edges of Touch and Nothing Else Matters against that wiry, hollow synth lines, to the much more blatant squonk of Oops, You Got a Nod, and especially the heavy New Jack Swing vibe of Private Show. That was just awesome! On the flip side, for as much as I didn't mind the tropical touches that filled up Your Love, or the reverb-heavy emptiness of Nobody Like You, which was well balanced enough to intensify the isolation, which was kind of quintessential to that song, other modern trends don't really treat Little Mix as well. The most obvious is that farty, fizzy synth all over Down and Dirty, with a bass-heavy drop and kind of popping melody that isn't nearly as dirty or rough-edged as it thinks it is. Similar case for Power. I really did like the wiry guitar line, the louder percussion, the motorcycle revving noises, but man, that song could have done without that squealing trap drop and I would have been just fine. But okay, some wonky instrumental choices aside, all it needs to hold up here is some good lyrics, and really it's a mixed bag here, but I do lean toward the positive. It's obvious the girls are taking a much more heavy role in the writing process, and it does lead to some more vulnerable, detailed, and effective pop songs, with Leanne probably taking the biggest lead here as a songwriter. But at the same time, this record does tilt into some questionable territory a few too many times. F.U. is that stupid alphabet gimmick to get to its title, and it would be a song about retribution about cheating guy if he wasn't so dreamy. Seriously, did Meghan Trainor write this? Well, no, she actually wrote one of the most obnoxious songs on this album with You Gotta Not, which not only has a vocal arrangement that doesn't give the girls any real room to really express themselves, but also emphasizes all the things this guy needs to put aside to be with her, like Blue's Clues, Bluetooth, and tidy whities that reveal a muffin top. Again, this is coming from a woman who called her ass her boom boom in one of the songs she wrote, but seriously, using that sort of language doesn't exactly inspire me to think that Little Mix are as mature as the guys that they want. Hell, even the diva flexing on Down and Dirty might be kind of grating, but at least the Game of Thrones reference in that song, it kind of worked. But really, where this album actually shines are in two places: the simple girl power anthems and in the love and hookup jams, which actually kind of get fused together in the album closer, Nothing Else Matters, and given the tumult of the whole relationship situation, it does kind of feel earned. And I think the straightforward framing of these songs does them a lot of credit. I've already talked about how Shout Out to My Ex is less obnoxious but having no ill will to this guy on Billboard Breakdown, but take Oops, for example, with Charlie Puth. I appreciate the awkward balancing act of it all, from the hookup to then getting the friend zone after the hookup, and then realizing they both have lingering feelings out of it and trying to rebuild that connection, which is all played kind of awkwardly, but it kind of works. Nobody Like You, it seems to head towards territory that's similar to F.U. It's a bad relationship that she wants to hold together despite it all, but it's very telling that this song frames her lack of self-esteem being the much greater issue than any real neglect in this situation. It's telling that that's where the framing and isolation lies. And No More Sad Songs goes after the breakup, where she just wants to cut loose to get over this ex and perhaps make him jealous, but then after having failed and then walking home alone, the realization comes that trying to hurt him is not going to make her situation any better. Of course, the flip side of the emotional complexity is then we get the broad strokes of the hookups on Touch and Your Love, which was pretty fine. Not to mention the over-the-top Private Show, which, yeah, I kind of really liked. Hell, Power even falls into that lane. If it wasn't for Jesse's interlude barking out the word bike, which just kind of felt ridiculous, that song might have connected better. I might have liked it more. But look, this might be the kind of album that I enjoy talking about and reviewing a little bit more than I enjoy itself, but I gotta confess, if Little Mix is gonna stay in pop, this was a refreshing step and one I kind of like. Less consistent overall, but the highs are greater, they're taking more chances. The production is still a little bit flat and plastic, but it's arguably the most full and detailed that it's ever been. It's clear they've got a little bit more of a budget here. The writing is picking up a bit more complexity. Again, there are misses, but I'm able to tolerate them. And the girls, they've never sounded bit better. Yes, there are some missteps here, but I like this album the same way that I like old S Club 7 records. Solid compositions, some wild swings that definitely do miss, but when they connect, they're making this sort of colorful and energetic pop music that I really do enjoy. For me, solid 7 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation. I do think some of this will be a tough sell, especially if you've wanted them to pivot towards R&B, but if not, hey, I'll take what I can get. Overall, it's a pretty good album. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here, so what do you guys think of this album? I can imagine the Little Mix fan base has been kind of divided from what I've seen, so did you fall in love with it, or do you wish they went more towards R&B and this just isn't your sound, just a little bit too cartoonish for you? But meanwhile, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other records coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.